The Garden of Eden is a story fundamental to Western thinking, and as stories tend to go, when they reach a certain age, they leave the foreground of the conscious mind to sit firmly in the subconscious. We tend not to give much thought to stories like this, but regardless of whether we give them much consideration, they are still very present in the psyche. The garden has many interpretations, from the fundamentalist Christian belief that the first woman was tricked by Satan, damning all of humanity to suffering and temptation, to the archaeological theory that it's a metaphor for the phase in our history where we transition from hunter-gatherers to agricultural societies. And there are many other interpretations, I'm sure. But your boy HP the Heretic wants to focus on a different interpretation, the one that I subscribe to. Our eating of the forbidden fruit of knowledge and our subsequent exile from the Garden of Eden was a story of humanity developing self-awareness. Speaking of subscribing too, why don't you hit that subscribe button for your boy HP Tell him, and a like helps the channel grow. Back to the video. So let's look at this concept and its many implications through the lens of one of my favorite genres, a genre with more relevance every day, cyberpunk. Cyberpunk and the Garden of Eden will be a series of multiple videos, and this first episode will focus on Neuromancer. So fair warning, there will be spoilers for the book, but I will keep them to a minimum. If you have any interest in these topics or the genre, I highly recommend this novel, and it will still be worth a read after watching this video. The author William Gibson is thought of as one of the fathers of the cyberpunk genre, and this book is considered one of its foundational works.
I contemplate the moment in the garden. The idea of allowing your own crucifixion. I think human consciousness was a tragic misstep in evolution. We became too self-aware. Nature created an aspect of nature separate from itself. We are creatures that should not exist by natural law.
That sounds god-fucking awful, Rush.
Now, True Detective, the best season of television ever created, isn't cyberpunk, but it is where I was introduced to this conception of the garden and self-awareness, and there is a parallel in Neuromancer I want to highlight here. Let's look at these two things. One, human beings are too self-aware and our awareness of self was an evolutionary mistake. And two, we are an aspect of nature separate from nature. In my travels, I've noticed people with self-awareness have a tendency towards depression, anxiety, and even existential dread. Hell, for years, I felt that the inescapable knowledge of myself, my actions, and my emotional states lended me towards these afflictions too. When I watched it back in 2015, one of the reasons I loved True Detective was that the character Russ vocalized some of the dark beliefs I was holding, when up to that point I was scared to admit those things to myself. When I was doing research for this video and I was looking more into this line from True Detective, I saw how much despair many intelligent people had toward consciousness itself. Perhaps even if people aren't talking about these ideas specifically, or pointing out self-awareness as the culprit of human suffering, there's a craving for simplicity and a metaphorical return to the garden, if you will. Many idealize life before civilization as somehow better than where we are now. And I get it, we live in an age where meaninglessness, apathy, and lack of purpose linger underneath things for so many of us. So a return to a less complex world is attractive.
Does life ever feel so crazy, so nuts, that you just want to drop your phone into a toilet and retreat to the woods?
I've heard so many times in conversations that people want to leave it all behind, live off the grid, or start homesteading without an internet connection. Not to mention the so-called doomers that welcome the fall of civilization so they can stop living with their existential dread. There's even a name for this line of thinking called lachicism, which is the desire for a disaster either in one's personal life or to the world at large, to grant clarity and a greater appreciation of life. To be fair, I suppose living in a Mad Max type post-apocalyptic hellscape really would hone the senses and tear us away from apathy, but I doubt they've thought it all the way through and realized how much more they'd be giving up other than existential dread. Beyond that, there seems to be a pervading question I see lurking in the periphery of humanity's thoughts. Is something fundamentally wrong with us?
There's something wrong with us. Something very, very wrong with us.
And maybe there is something wrong with us. It certainly feels like it sometimes. Greed, inequality, poverty, injustice, hatred, and war have been present in humanity for all of recorded history. We pollute our planet despite feeling it is morally wrong and knowing it could lead to our extinction. We witness the ravages of greed, violence, and oppression still present on our planet and feel powerless to do anything about it. But fret not, my brothers and sisters. HP the Well-Wisher is here to present a thought experiment that feels more useful. And excuse me if you think this is a cop-out, but I prefer to believe that maybe, just maybe, we're experiencing evolution. Not biological evolution, but conscious evolution, moral evolution. Something that entails a lot of growing pains and may take a very, very long time. Maybe this sort of evolution is more contingent on the individual choosing to evolve themselves, rather than have nature do it for us. But I digress. Let's move on to the cyberpunk part of Cyberpunk and the Garden of Eden. No cyberpunk story is complete without a multinational corporation with more power and wealth than the nations they do business in. In Neuromancer, the main one explored is called Tessier Ashpool. Where most of the mega corporations in the world of Neuromancer are publicly traded with investors and a board of directors, functioning as a sort of superorganism that operates like a hive mind, much like many of the corporations today. Tessier Ashpool is unique in that they run more like an ancient oligarchy with a king and queen. They live in high orbit in a space station they own called Freeside, with their own base separate from the rest of the population called Villa Straylight. In orbit, laws on genetic engineering are more lax, and they propagate their clan, as they call it, through a mixture of cloning and interbreeding. They are truly an anachronistic manifestation of the medieval oligarchies of old, with all the eccentric tastes, aesthetics, and obsessive desire for immortality intact. Marie France, the queen if you will, and the Tessier half of Tessier Ashpool, saw self-awareness as a major flaw in the human condition. Her vision for their clan was to make an artificial intelligence capable of running their empire so that their decision-making wasn't necessary. And although it doesn't mention it directly, probably genetic engineering to alter the makeup of the brain to undo self-awareness. She dreamed of a state involving very little in the way of individual consciousness. Animal bliss. I think she viewed the evolution of the forebrain as a sort of sidestep. Only in certain heightened modes would an individual, a clan member, suffer the more painful aspects of self-awareness. Hold up. The idea for a video series I would call Cyberpunk and the Garden of Eden came to me before I even read this book. So Neuromancer having this concept within was a little something I like to call Synchronicity.
What you got for me?
Synchronicity.
More than I can know.
Synchronicity.
Blows my fucking mind, baby.
Synchronicity.
Every fucking time, baby.
Ooh. Get used to this. It is a bit I will be coming back to for years to come. But wait, does she have a point? Does Detective Rustin Cole from True Detective, the best season of television ever created, have a point? Self-awareness puts every individual human inescapably at the center of their own universe. We are creatures who don't have much of a choice but to be self-centered. I've even thought that the most selfless actions I've ever done were because they made me feel good doing them. Maybe doing the right thing is the best option for those of us with moral values because deep down we know that doing the wrong thing won't feel good in the long run. I'm not talking about rich people who engage in philanthropy to get tax breaks, for good PR, or to brag to their smug friends. I'm talking about normal, everyday people here doing good because it feels better than doing bad. Maybe morality isn't baked into the human condition for the sake of goodness or the grace of God. Maybe morality is better for a harmonious civilization, and our compulsion to be a good person is really just a reward mechanism to that end. We are all self-aware to some degree, but there is a spectrum of innate self-awareness, and this excessive self-consciousness is known to be more present for people who suffer from depression. There is a cognitive bias called the Dunning-Kruger effect, where people with less knowledge tend to overestimate their own competence, while people with more knowledge tend to assume they are incompetent. Intelligent people and innately self-aware people have a tendency towards second-guessing themselves and a higher capacity for analyzing their shortcomings. Also, the more knowledge someone has, the more they are able to recognize how much knowledge they don't have. This can lend itself to a capacity for self-doubt, self-criticism, and analysis paralysis. When Marie France called it animal bliss, the old idiom ignorance is bliss came to mind. The more you think and involve yourself in that thinking, the more you can involve your own shortcomings and imagine your own failures. If we are to consider our exile from the Garden of Eden as an allegory for our departure from the state of being just an animal bliss as she called it, into us becoming an aspect of nature beside itself, self-aware, then this awareness led to us leaving the supposed bliss of being fully present and governed purely by instinct. Leaving this bliss, we began the foray into a much larger unknowing by being able to know anything. With this gift and this curse, we were given a paradox. We had no choice but to have a choice. We were given free will. The ability to create, to destroy, to hate, to love, to project our plans into the future, and to tell ourselves the story of our past, all of this is predicated from the knowledge of self and the leaving of our instinctual animal nature. The weight of this is immense. Free will carries with it the consequences and the responsibility for our choices, all while we can never truly know all of the consequences of these choices. Have you ever heard the term horseshit problems? In 1894, there was a horse manure crisis in cities across the world. London was estimated to have 50,000 horses transporting people and goods in the city daily, and each horse was dropping 15 to 35 pounds of manure a day. A fucking day. The manure attracted flies, and those flies spread typhoid fever and other diseases. Let's not forget they had to go number 1 too. Imagine what the smell must have been like. In 1898, there was an international urban planning conference that debated this issue and tried to find a solution, but no solution could be found. We seemed to be doomed to the horseshit problem for the rest of our days. But by 1912, the automobile replaced the need for horses for transport, and the insurmountable problem went away entirely. Now, automobiles are one of the major contributors to greenhouse gases, leading to climate change. It seems like humans have an innate compulsion to keep bringing our ideas into reality, yet we lack the ability to truly know what consequences might come of it. Not to mention the countless internal and interpersonal decisions we make every day that we are responsible for, while we are unable to be perfect to ourselves and to those around us. A simple act of kindness to a stranger could have a life-changing or even life-saving impact on them, even when we think nothing of it and don't see the results. We are faced with this folly of not knowing daily, yet we are forced through the not knowing and have to try to figure it out anyway. To some people, this brings about existential dread, and to others, it has led to a rejection of self-accountability altogether. Pessimism, determinism, nihilism, what difference does it make in the grand scheme of things? All may be responses to the dread of free will and the weight of life's unknowability. There is a quote in the Bhagavad Gita to consider here. Your right is to the work only, and never to the fruit thereof. Do not be the cause of the fruit of action, nor let your attachment lead to inaction. Food for thought, but I don't want to dive too much into the science of karma and attachment in this video. Life and morality is complex, and being a human is hard, no doubt about it. Shit, even having a body is weird at times. Case, the protagonist of Neuromancer, is a cowboy, which is the term for hackers that travel through cyberspace to infiltrate data centers. One of my favorite things about Cyberpunk is the exploration of inhabiting a body, a fundamental aspect of our experience, yet one we as a species have continuously sought to manipulate and improve upon throughout history. From eyeglasses to prosthetic limbs, and as our technology progresses, it is very likely the cyberpunk trope of cybernetic limbs will be a reality that gives us the option to replace our natural anatomy. Another trait common for characters in cyberpunk stories is a distaste for their body's limitations and inherent needs. Before the story begins, Case was a successful cowboy making good money until he stole from his employer. His punishment was a procedure inflicted upon his nervous system that removed his ability to jack in to cyberspace to do what a cowboy does. I really enjoyed William Gibson's vision of cyberspace in Neuromancer. His writing style achieved an abstract experience I'd have to call techno-psychedelia, a term I may or may not have made up, but if you've read the book, you know exactly what I mean. If you've ever done a research chemical psychedelic, not that I have, reading this book felt reminiscent of that at times. Dreamlike, but infused with this weirdness of everything being man-made, cyberspace is an out-of-body experience that cowboys live for. What it offers them is like a drug. Case lost his ability to be freed from his own body. For Case, who had lived for the bodiless exaltation of cyberspace, it was the fall. In the bars he frequented as a cowboy hotshot, the elite stances involved a certain relaxed contempt for the flesh. The body was meat. Case fell into the prison of his own flesh. All the meat, he thought, and all at once. This concept is not unique to cyberpunk or the future. Many live to escape the present through addiction and compulsive distraction today. Most of us engage in this escapism without even noticing it through mindless habits, like blank-faced scrolling on social media, binge-watching Netflix, video game addiction, or taking it to the extreme with drug abuse. Drug addiction is a theme explored a lot in Cyberpunk. Case is an amphetamine addict. There are even religious belief systems predicated on the soul being bound to the body as an inherent estrangement from God. Original sin, for example, the Christian doctrine that humans, through being born, inherit a tainted nature by having the body's innate need to reproduce and a desire for pleasure through sensation. The philosopher Plato ignored and even hated the body. In Gnosticism, the belief was that the mind was superior to the body, and physical reality was a sort of prison that needed to be overcome by rejecting the body and mastering the mind. There is a sense in the collective consciousness that the body is separate from the soul, and as we've continued to develop technology, drugs, and new forms of entertainment, we've become exceedingly good at leaving our body. Yet every method of leaving the body seems to come with a cost. Living a sedentary life causes health problems, and compulsively living in the mind can cause mental health issues. But yet again, fret not, my brothers and sisters. HP, the Hemweaver, is here to present an alternative for thee. In some Hindu traditions, there is a concept I find much more useful as a belief system to live by. Physical reality is the result of consciousness descending into matter, and the habitation of the soul in a human body is for the reasons of divine play and divine enjoyment. With this belief, we can leave the paradigm of the flesh prison or the matrix and see life as an illusion of sorts, where we as consciousness in material reality are here to witness and interact with consciousness through the play of limitation. If consciousness comes from a higher dimension, then perhaps in that higher dimension, time and space don't exist. Everything is everywhere all at once, which as much as I'm sure this unity is glorious and maybe even peaceful, when you think about it, that all sounds a bit one note, doesn't it? Nothing is new or old, living or dead. There's no chance at success or failure because nothing changes. It just is. If consciousness descended into matter to create this universe as we know it, then maybe consciousness had a good reason. Who knows if this is true, but if we play around with this belief, at the very least as a thought experiment, we can remember we came here for fun. We came here for a challenge. We came here to fully forget everything to start brand new. We came here to experience life from its beginning to its end, with all of its challenges, all of its heartbreak, and for the chance at glory. An experience having a beginning and end is beautiful in and of itself. Maybe we left the harmony of the Garden of Eden for the challenge of discovering a higher harmony despite insurmountable odds. Maybe this is all a game. Life is to be lived, not controlled, and humanity is won by continuing to play in the face of certain defeat. Ralph Ellison. None of us are getting out of this shit alive, so let's accept that shit and keep it moving. As much as drugs and cybernetics are a staple of cyberpunk, we find the most extreme example of rejection of the body coming from people having their consciousness uploaded or imprinted onto data, and some even have it done to them against their will. I couldn't help but interpret the poignancy of the character Dixie in Neuromancer with the idea of consciousness's descent into matter and mind. In the story, Case gets access to a construct, a personality engram of a human that is imprinted into code. Dixie Flatline, aka McCoy Pauly, a cowboy legend, and the former mentor of Case, is this construct. Some of my favorite bits of dialogue in the book are between Case and Dixie, and the exploration of what human consciousness would look like translated into lines of code to be accessed from a piece of hardware is fascinating. One of the most chilling tells of the implications of this is Dixie's laughter and how it evokes a visceral reaction from Case every time he hears it. Some context, a Hosaka is the deck Case uses for hacking into cyberspace. How you doing, Dixie? I'm dead, Case. Got enough time in on this Hosaka to figure that one. How's it feel? It doesn't. Bother you? What bothers me is nothing does. How's that? Had me this buddy in Russian camp, Siberia. His thumb was frostbit. Medics came by and they cut it off. A month later, he's tossing all night. Elroy, I said, what's eating you? Goddamn thumb's itching, he says. So I told him, scratch it. McCoy, he says, it's the other goddamn thumb. When the construct laughed, it came through as something else, not laughter, but a slab of cold down Case's spine. Dixie is aware he is dead, but still alive in some way. The construct of his quirks, personality, and his knowledge imprinted into a set of data is enough of Dixie present on the construct for self-awareness, like Johnny Silverhand in Cyberpunk 2077. Me, I'm not human either, but I respond like one, see? Wait a sec, Case said. Are you sentient or not? Well, it feels like I am, kid, but I'm really just a bunch of ROM. It's one of them, philosophical questions, I guess. The ugly laughter sensation rattled down Case's spine. But I ain't likely to write you no poem, if you follow me. As Dixie helps Case throughout the plot, he says when it's all said and done, he wants to be erased. Without his body, he doesn't experience emotion. And his laughter is a line of code that impersonates his personality quirks, but it isn't real. So the sound of laughter disturbs Case every time he hears it. The reality of Dixie being an echo of himself, truly disembodied and without the whole of being a conscious being within a body, sounds terrifying to me. Dixie is a cowboy like Case, and they all live for the bodiless exultation of cyberspace and treat the flesh as a prison. This likens the cyberspace experience to a dreamlike state, where you are outside of the body, but some part of you is still bound to the body. But when Dixie truly achieves a bodiless state, his only wish is to be deleted. So as much as one can despair at inhabiting a body or wish for a simpler state without self-awareness, Dixie is bothered by not being able to feel even his negative emotions. This begs the questions. Do we take for granted our passions and our labors? If we were removed from our ability to feel anything, whether it's ecstasy or suffering, would we miss it? If we had the chance to return to the harmony of the Garden of Eden, would we just end up choosing to return to the strife of our concrete jungle? Maybe in some mysterious way we chose to evolve the way we did. Maybe we weren't exiled from the garden. Maybe we just chose to leave. When I was researching this video, I came across a quote from the cyberfeminist Donna Haraway. First of all, that's cool. I didn't know cyberfeminism was a thing. She wrote the Cyborg Manifesto, where she rejects the concept of an innate human nature. We are made up of many parts, both natural and unnatural. I share this idea, and truly I reject the idea of there being a difference between natural and unnatural at all. I will go more into this in a later video, and my only knowledge of her work is from a YouTube video I found when I was researching for this, so I don't want to speak too much on her work without having read it myself. But from what I saw, my admittedly cherry-picked interpretation is that she rejects the moral fundamentalist concept that looks towards simplicity alone for the human being to reach wholeness. It is a rejection of the idea that us regressing back to the garden as somehow a better state of being. The cyborg would not recognize the Garden of Eden. It is not made of mud and cannot dream of returning to dust. Hold up, did she really just say the Garden of Eden? I swear I came up with this idea before I found this quote. You know what time it is. Thank you to the mother, 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 and to the mother.
Yeah, what? I can't believe it, we got the synchronicity!
I told you I'd come back to it. Implicit in the Garden of Eden in our psyche is a glorification of it. This idea that we as a collective can return to innocence, return to the instinctual animal state of being without the weight we associate with self-awareness. Hence both Marie France and Rustin Cole from True Detective, the best season of television ever created, referring to self-awareness as a tragedy and a misstep. Russ says we should stop procreating and let ourselves die out, yikes. And Marie France dumped untold resources from her corporation to enable her family to return to animal bliss, as she called it. Again, I was ecstatic to have come up with this idea for Cyberpunk in the Garden of Eden and have the first book I read to get started on this video series have a major plot point be exactly in line with what I was aiming for here. Y'all know what time it is. I feel like this is too much on this bit about synchronicity, and I'd like to save some of my creative juices for later, but whatever. Alright, that's enough. Let's move on. I feel the need to go on a tangent here. This returning to the simplicity of the Garden of Eden is an illusion. First of all, we have evolved to be self-aware, and I refuse to disrespect nature by thinking this is some sort of mistake. As difficult as it is being a sentient being, we need to stop feeling sorry for ourselves and looking at one of the cornerstones of our experience as an evolutionary mistake or a condemnation from God. Second, why would we think that a return to lesser consciousness is somehow better? Maybe we take for granted the unknowable and unending challenges life puts in front of the conscious being. Without these innumerable challenges that life brings, this shit would be easy. If everything was everywhere all at once, nothing would happen and things would get fucking boring. And third, if we were just naked in the woods or in caves without the mental faculties to create tools and shelter, we'd be getting fucking eaten by snakes and bears, and we'd be having our food eaten by scavengers while we slept on the rocky ass, cold ass floor of these caves. Fuck that. I like sleeping in a bed and being warm in the winter. I feel the need to reiterate here what I said earlier. There are definitely consequences to our progress. I'm not denying that. But part of progress is adjusting to an ever-changing world with ever-changing moral complexity. I prefer to have hope that this is part of our collective purpose here. I'm not trying to convert anybody into my beliefs. That's not my intention with this channel. But I figured I could offer a disclaimer here to share a little about who I am and where I'm coming from, at least at this point in my life. I've always believed the universe is conscious, and I've always believed that I, as a human, have a unique ability on Earth to witness that consciousness. Other than those two core principles, my beliefs have changed over and over again. To simplify my posture toward life for the purposes of this video, I will state that I view exploration and experimentation as the ideal way to live my life spiritually. So if I hear something about the nature of reality or learn about a spiritual concept from somewhere, I run with it as a thought experiment and treat none of it as dogma. The reason for this is to sift through information and find what's useful for me in my day-to-day life. If it helps me to be a more effective, loving, and generative human, I believe that shit. If it brings me a sense of dread and hopelessness, I reject that shit. I don't attribute any sort of stakes in me believing the wrong thing because I can just as easily stop believing it if it no longer serves me. I don't believe in God punishing me for not holding the right beliefs. I have free will, therefore I am free to create my own beliefs, and I am free to create my own reality. Simple as that. I say all of this as a man who was hopelessly depressed, isolated, and addicted to hard drugs for the majority of my life. I've lived in the hopelessness of the pessimistic thoughts I'm refuting here. I've lived in the apathy and exhaustion of constant pain in my body from not using it. I've lived a life of despair without purpose or meaning. I've lived in the confusion of why the fuck do I always feel so sick and tired for over a decade. So I don't judge anybody who is wrapped up in their own pain and doesn't know of any way out. I'm not trying to propagate any simplistic pick yourself up by the bootstraps type mentality here. All I'm saying is we don't have to confine ourselves to the limits of what we're used to. We don't have to limit ourselves to the cynical stories we have told ourselves about ourselves and believed for as long as we can remember. Many of our limitations are self-imposed, and most, if not all of our self-imposed limitations aren't even our own fault. Overbearing or neglectful parents, rejection from loved ones, trauma, addiction, abuse, all of these experiences are things that happen to us to turn our self-image and self-awareness into a tool for self-pity, shame, regret, and self-loathing. We set upon ourselves limitations of who we are and give up on who we can be. We deny what we are capable of without even noticing ourselves do it. And as deep-seated as these beliefs can be, anything self-imposed can be undone, and anything learned can be unlearned. The rejection of limitations is a cornerstone of the cyberpunk genre that I adore. So fuck returning to the garden. Y'all can find me in the concrete jungle. Much love, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that exploration. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe for more stuff in the future. Keep coming back to my channel. Right now, I'm reading Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? And the next installation in Cyberpunk in the Garden of Eden will probably be around the difference between the natural world and the concrete jungle, as well as artificial intelligence, which is something that I want to explore a lot. Yeah. What else? I think that's it. Oh yeah. Comment below. Let's start a discussion. I assure you I will read them all. Okay. Bye.